Hello, my name is Jacob Kamhis. I'm host and producer of a series of clean energy programs. This one will cover what's happening 3, 5, maybe 10 years down the road. We're going to be starting off with Jose Dizon, who's General Manager of Paniolo Power LLC, a subsidiary of Parker Ranch. We're going to be talking about what's happening now and in the future with their plans to support the community and possibly even power the entire Big Island. So let's go up and talk to Jose. He's waiting. Today we're with Jose Dizon. He's General Manager of Paniolo Power LLC, which is a subsidiary of Parker Ranch on the Big Island. So Jose, thank you for meeting with us today.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Good. So tell us, over the last few years, Parker Ranch has combined efforts with Booz Allen, with Siemens. There were attempts made with NextEra. What's happened since then?
Okay, let me give you a little bit of the backstory first. When oil prices were very high, approaching 42 cents and beyond, the ranch was losing profits, or the margins were going negative on the Mauna Kea side of the ranch in terms of our cattle operations. We're one of the top 10 largest cow-calf operations in the nation. Not a lot of people know that. So ranching is a very big part of our lives. So we started looking at alternative ways to improve our margins on cattle operations, which forced us, in a sense, to get into the energy business. And so we've worked with Siemens and Booz Allen to come up with alternatives for the ranch, but not just Parker Ranch, but since the neighbors, since the towns grew around Parker Ranch, the town of Waimea, North Kahala, how we could take care of them as well. And then we started to understand what our resources were, our renewable energy resources, and they were vast. NextEra pointed out that we've had about probably a 500 megawatt potential of wind alone. And keep in mind that the load, the peak load of the electric utility on the Big Island is only about 190 megawatts.
For the entire island?
For the entire island. So huge potential there. We have...
Well, there's only about, 180, 190,000 people on the entire island of the
Correct.
Big Island, right?
Correct.
That island, you could fit in Oahu, Maui, Lanai, Molokai, I think a few times.
2 times over at least.
It's about 4,000 square miles into
Correct.
that island.
Yeah. Yeah. So wind potential is great. There's a lot of solar potential on the island. On Parker Ranch, we have the elevations for what's called pump storage hydro, which is an energy storage technology.
That's where you pump water up a hill and then you let it go down a hill, but you have to make sure that you pump it up when the electricity is cheap.
Exactly. Very good. That's right. And it works. And that water could also be used for agriculture, for row crop farming, for drought mitigation.
The same water.
The same water. Drought mitigation for
Would it be
cattle.
replenished by rainwater? Is that the way it works?
Yeah, rainwater, our existing increment of water on the ranch. There's sources of water that we use on the ranch to make up for that and evaporation. So for an agricultural community, for the breadbasket of Hawaii, like Waimea is, where Parker Ranch is in the center, it's a great energy storage
What kind
resource.
of products, when you say breadbasket, what kind of products are generated there?
So
food products?
A lot of farming, carrots, lettuce. There's a number of big farms on the Big Island, ranching, cattle, sheep, goats, for meats, for dairy products.
So there's potential for expanding the agricultural side.
Definitely, and with the desire to become more sustainable, not just on energy, but on food. I think it's lowering the energy cost on the Big Island to make that happen, to improve the economy, and to help expand agriculture for our state is really important.
Okay, very good. So some of the successes, I presume, have been information, research, getting your feet wet, because it's kind of unusual for a ranch to now develop a new product, which is called electrical power. That's a long stretch from cows and goats and all of that, right?
That's true.
It's a totally new industry you're getting into.
That's true. We had to get back into it, and it has taken a lot of resources and support. we've been working on the policy side with the regulators and the legislators to help push the need to get off of oil as fast as possible, to not be dependent on the volatility that oil prices are inherently there, and,
Right.
and using renewable resources, which are basically just capital intensive because their cost of energy is essentially free, whether it's from the sun or the wind or just pumping water up and down. So we try to eliminate that volatility, which we think is going to be great for those folks on fixed incomes. The Big Island has one of the lowest wages in the state, and we have
And it has probably one of the highest electrical rates.
and highest electrical rates, right? And about 22% of the island is on food stamps. So it's more than just Parker Ranch. This is bigger than the communities of Waimea and North Kahala, but this is about how do we improve the lifestyles, the economy of the folks in the Big Island.
Okay, very good. So I see that there may have been some successes. What are the continuing challenges that keep you busy today?
Working with the community, I think, is very important, and sharing the information that we have learned over the last couple of years. How does wind energy work, and how can it be beneficial to us? How do you tie wind and storage, such as pump storage, together to provide resources that could potentially and should replace the oil-fired generation of the electric
In other words,
utility?
generate power through the turbines and then pump the water up and then regain that potential on the way
Correct.
down.
And do it in a way to where the utility could use it and use it to replace its existing fossil-fired generation, oil-fired generation. And of course, sun power as well, using photovoltaic, that equation as well. So there's a tremendous amount of resources for PV. I think there's about 200 to 300 megawatts of photovoltaic resources on the ranch alone. And NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab, has completed studies that says there's probably several thousand megawatts of PV potential. So if you can imagine, if we could build larger scale wind and photovoltaic and even pump storage, you could lower the cost of energy because of the economies of scale. And those economies of scale would drive down electricity prices, which should make it better off for everybody on the Big Island and the state.
Any specific areas?
Yeah, in the North Kahala area, the wind resources there are so great. Nextera and other developers have said the wind resource is the best that they've ever seen, the best in the world. And they look at that in terms of wind speeds. With Class 1, wind speeds go between Class 1 and Class 7, Class 7 being the best, and the winds at Parker Ranch in North Kahala are Class 7. And they go with capacity factors. Capacity factor is a measure of how much energy can be generated relative to the size of your plants. Typically, utilities, developers are happy with 30% capacity factor for wind. At Parker Ranch in North Kahala, wind capacity factors are exceeding 60%, which when you talk to any developer, they say that's the best wind they've ever seen in their lifetime. It's beyond
And these are the
world-class.
trades that come through?
Yes, mostly from the trade winds, right? And the capacity of wind is, again, about 300 to 500 megawatts, so more than what the island needs. The solar resource on Parker Ranch is on the west side of Waimea in an area we call Pupa. There's several hundred megawatt potential there, and the resource is very, very strong. So that's an area that could be used as well for solar. And pump storage is two places up in the North Kahala area and more towards the southwest of Waimea town. Again, very, very good resources, very good elevations. Developers would like to see length head ratios. The length is the distance between the reservoirs, upper and lower reservoirs, and head is the height difference. I'd like to see head length ratios of 10 or less, and at Parker Ranch we have head length ratios of about 5.7 to 6.
So there's a diamond in the rough here.
Very much so. And we are educating the utility, the regulators, and the legislators that we have to push to make these resources available as quickly as possible, again, with the goal of getting off of oil as quickly
So
as
is it
possible.
regulatory, is it financial? I believe your CEO, Neil Dutch Kuiper, said he was looking for approximately 300 million or something at some point. What would it take? Would it take tens of millions, hundreds of millions?
We're looking, if you're looking at a good pump storage project, wind and PV, probably in the neighborhood of a couple $100 million in capital for the size that would be compatible for the electric utility. Keep in mind that the electric utility spends over $250 million in oil a year.
Right, we spend a lot on
Yeah.
oil, yeah. And then the return on this, would it start almost immediately once it's installed and tested?
The payback period should be relatively short. We've done studies that show that the actual rate impact to the customers are fairly immediate. And we're also, Siemens, in their last report to us, said that they could get to 100% renewable portfolio standard within 10 years following our plan, which is faster than what the utility can do. The utility is meeting the legislative guideline of 100% by 2045, and Siemens is saying we can get there, 10 years earlier.
I see. Well, there's been a lot of discussion, I believe even legislation on microgrids and community-based solar. So it would seem to me that this would fit in to this particular category. What other challenges are there?
It would, and we were initially looking at the microgrid, the regional microgrid, to help our customers and our neighbors in Waimea and North Kahala. We've since done other studies using larger resources to benefit the rest of the island. We said, well, if Waimea and North Kahala could benefit from this, can the entire island benefit? So we asked Siemens and Booz to go back and do a study for the entire island, and the answer is yes. And so we are focused now on trying to make these resources available for everybody and trying to get them online as soon as possible.
Okay, right now, Hawaii Electric Light Company is supplying the power to the Big Island, which is a subsidiary of Hawaiian Electric. So then what do you see Hawaiian Electric doing if Parker Ranch moves forward with this master plan?
Well, there's a couple ways they could look at this. One, they should be looking at Parker Ranch as a partner in helping to develop and grow the renewable energy resources for the Big Island. And we are certainly willing to work with them on that. They are the electric utility. One of the roles that Parker Ranch could play in this is just to make the resources, the renewable energy resources, available to the utility, to developers, to sign a power purchase contract with the utility to provide benefit for all customers through large generation projects.
So Parker Ranch doesn't want to be a developer, it wants to supply the resources.
Correct. At this point in time, well, we certainly can be a developer.
You can be.
And Pioneer Power, at one time, or still can, be a utility or a co-op. I've explored that.
Similar to Kauai.
Similar to Kauai, yeah. We've explored that in pretty good detail. But I think at this point in time, it would be most beneficial for the utility and for the other customers if we just made our resource available to drop rates for everybody. The co-op or the electric utility that Pioneer Power could be would just focus on Waimea or North Kahala. The microgrid concept in general, and if you consider Waimea and North Kahala as a regional microgrid, is good for adding resiliency to the utilities operations. Imagine, for example, if there was a microgrid up in Waimea and North Kahala, one in Puna, one in South Ka'u in South Hawaii, one in, let's say, Kona, Captain Cook. If there was a hurricane or an earthquake that took out a certain area of the island, the other microgrids could maintain power.
Sort of like an internet.
Yes, exactly, exactly. With the backbone being the utility and their transmission system, which of course all the microgrids could just operate independent of that.
Okay, very interesting. The distribution system right now belongs to Helco.
Yes.
So do you figure that you might be able to use that? Would it be very expensive to put in your own new distribution system? What are the plus and minuses there?
Interesting. If you were to become a utility, you would put in your own poles and wires. During the initial studies that Siemens and Booz Allen did when we were looking at the regional microgrid, the concept was, let's use the utilities' wires and poles. We will pay them to
Lease them?
To lease them, to provide power to the customers in Waimea and North Kahala. At the time when electricity prices were 42 plus cents a kilowatt hour, we asked Booz to also look at Painola Power building its own power lines. And amazingly, we could build our own power lines and still beat the utilities' existing rates at the time.
Really?
Rates were that high, the utility...
Would it be underground or would it be lots new above ground?
We were just looking at above ground installations.
Okay.
But the point of that exercise was the operations of the grid, the wires, the generation is very expensive. And so there was a lot of opportunity to reduce costs by being a lot more transformational. So that's where the large-scale wind, large-scale solar, large-scale pump storage, hydro comes into play.
Okay, and the hydro, give me the area where that would work. Would that be the reservoir?
That would be two reservoirs, a lower reservoir and an upper reservoir about a couple thousand feet higher. You'd fill one reservoir up with water, and then that water moves up and down, pumped up, as you said earlier, when electricity prices are low, probably in the middle of the day, when the marginal cost of electricity is low. And in the afternoon or the early evening, before Helco would start its fossil-fired peaking units, just let that water flow downhill and make electricity.
And the name of that reservoir is?
You call that the upper and lower reservoir. We don't have any names for it yet. It just depends ultimately where we or a developer would put that in.
Okay, very good, very good. The nexus, you kind of briefly mentioned the nexus.
Yeah.
The idea is for employing wind, solar, biomass, and maybe even geothermal. Can you tell us where the biomass would come in? In other words, you've got farmland. There is potential for crops to be used as fuels. How does that fit into your master plan?
The nice thing about Parker Ranch and even the Big Island in general is the resources are just vast. You have a lot of trees on Kamehameha School's land, on Parker Ranch lands, and other places on the east side of the Big Island. You have the potential to grow grasses for energy crops.
Grasses,
energy grasses, whether it's banana grass or elephant grass, other types of grasses that grow really quickly and that have a high heat content. So that's available on the Big Island, given the vast amount of land that we have to grow those type of resources. So you can put biomass anywhere, practically on the island. Ideally, the utility would like it somewhere close to a transmission line.
Of course.
So they don't have to build additional transmission lines. There's a lot of geothermal resources potential on the Big Island. I don't think there's as much as they thought back in 1986, but the East Rift Zone certainly has a lot of geothermal resource there. They found some over in the central part of the Big Island in Parker Ranch and PTA, the Pohakaloa training area, and then more potential resources probably in the Hualalai area in West Hawaii.
Okay. And so this nexus, by nexus, do you define it as one or more different power generating sources working together and being integrated to supply power?
And you'd have to. It's not just one resource or another. I think
In case there's no wind one day?
Exactly.
Go out and cut some grass.
and burn it for for biomass, sure. Uh, but how you integrate that with water, like in pump storage for row crop farming, drought mitigation, cattle, drinking water for cattle, supporting the agricultural industry, again, farming and ranching, pasture management, and being good stewards of the land in general. But tying water, agriculture, energy together, we call that the nexus.
Ah, got it. Okay, good. So is it possible that Paniolo Power may become the new Big Island utility?
Let's just say that it ain't over yet. Let's see how the utility performs during this technology disruption in this new paradigm where the energy world is shifting.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see where that goes. Until then, Parker Ranch and Paniolo Power will continue to advocate for the resources on the ranch.
And I assume the community, because it's very involved in community, supporting schools, a trust, a foundation, a hospital.
Absolutely. Our beneficiaries in the community, we have to work closely together with all of those. So, yeah, we will continue to do that.
Okay. Well, good luck to you.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks. Life of the Land has been around for a long time. It's an environmental group that's worked on a lot of important cases when it comes to energy. And today it continues to be quite involved in the progress toward renewable energy. And we're with Henry Curtis, the Executive Director today. How you doing, Henry?
Great, Jacob. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for joining us. So I'd like to find out, Life of the Land, it's been around for decades. What's it going to be doing over the next 3 to 5, maybe 10 years when it comes to renewable energy?
One of the interesting things we're going to be working on is more on the financial side of renewable energy and looking at the cost impacts and the rate impacts of having greater amounts of renewable energy. The second area we're focusing on, traditionally the utility was this central entity which spread electricity out down.
Right.
And now we've come to the point where distribution lines are flowing two ways. And we're going to be entering an era where some of the energy from the distribution line will be coming back onto the transmission line. We're also looking at sort of the edge of the grid. The meter has traditionally been the edge of the grid, but as 70,000 people have rooftop solar, as people begin putting on storage, as you're able to shift demand on your system and have it controlled by the utility, such as solar water heaters, you're able to, or electric water heaters, you're able to have the meter no longer be the edge. The edge is sort of expanded outwards.
It's become two-way.
It's become two-way.
So it's become a little bit more complex.
If something went really wrong and you had to lop off a certain number of customers, and so you took and you said, this group of customers we're going to lose power to balance the load during this critical time. In the new era, as you dump them, you're also dumping their energy production. So if they're feeding energy into the grid, you're losing some of your supply as well as cutting their demand.
Wow.
So the system is becoming a lot more complex. And even as we start thinking about batteries in people's homes, and the utility needs to know that you have the battery, there's all these new battery companies like the Tesla Powerwall and others that you just plug and play inside your house that the utility has no idea whether you're using or not. So we're creating a vast two-way or multiple-way network. And so you need new rules on how it's done, new rules on how it's regulated, new rules on how the utility makes a profit.
And switching systems as well?
Switching systems, and new rules on how all the players and all the users of energy are able to do it in a way that it doesn't harm any of the different players.
Wow. So how is Life of the Land going to be involved in that?
We get involved in a large number of regulatory proceedings dealing with all aspects. One thing would be on rate allocation issues, for example, on how you price different mechanisms within homes and businesses and how they're priced to both help the person who's supplying energy or reliability to the grid, and yet also make sure that those who are not participating in the program are not hurt from it.
Wow. What type of renewable or clean energy are you most concerned about affecting the environment?
One of the dangers is that urban areas will look at rural areas and see a lot of open space and a lot of agricultural land and say, wouldn't it be nifty if we coat them all with solar panels so that we can have energy?
But
So
there's nowhere to put them in a city.
Right. Well, you can put them on roofs. You can put them on sides of buildings. You can, when you flush the toilet on the 30th floor and the water drops 30 floors, you can actually create power off of that.
You mean through wastewater?
Yeah, any pipe that is dropping 300 feet has a certain amount of water pouring down it.
So a condominium could literally create its own electrical power by sewage water going down the stack or going down the pipe.
Right. There are so many different possibilities, but if instead the urban areas seek to industrialize the rural areas, figuring they don't live there and people just have empty space and why not use it?
For their benefit.
For their benefit. Suddenly you're creating an us versus them. You're creating a split. And we need to create programs that move everybody forward and doesn't create rivalries between different kinds of neighborhoods. The second thing we need to do is really look at all different kinds of renewable energy, for example, wave energy. You might not think about this, but the waves crashing on the Molokai shore have enough energy to give all the electricity the state uses 20 times over.
Wow, which shore is that? Is that the Kalapapa
Well,
side?
all around the island. If you look
The
at
entire island.
Right, if you look at either the 50-meter level, the contour at 50 meters of water, or at 200 meters, those are the two contours that are commonly used.
Is it because of the depth of the water?
Well, it's Oahu has enough. So I'm not picking out Molokai, but Oahu has enough wave energy coming on the shore that we could power the state many times over. But Oahu has less wave energy than most of the other islands. So Molokai, Maui, the Big Island, all of them could power the state just from wave energy.
Incredible.
So people are thinking about, what if you put wind energy way, way out there so you can't see it, and you have a cable bringing it ashore. Now, some people have said, well, that's not the way to go, or it is the way to go. But we need to think outside the box. And we need to make sure that in thinking outside the box, we're not penalizing one community to help another community.
Uh-huh.
Hawaiian electric companies have just released their power supply improvement plans at the end of December. And they said, what if we wanted to, solar's so popular, what if we want to put in a lot of solar? And they looked at what happens if you take from Wahiwa to Haleiwa, all that agricultural land, and you took every single valley along the Waianae coast and all that empty space, all that agricultural space, and what if you covered the entire thing with solar?
Ah, I see.
Now suddenly, you're not thinking of the North Shore as open space and agriculture, you're thinking about giant reflections and solar panels everywhere.
I see.
Whereas if you go out to the Nu'uanu, has the Oahu Country Club in Nu'uanu,
Mm-hmm.
you don't think about it, but right next to the runway, there's a row of bushes and then a large ground-based solar panel system. So it's a question of...
You mean fairway? On
the fairway.
Mm-hmm.
Next, yeah, the fairway. So there are ways of putting in solar that fits within a given ecosystem, and there are ways of not fitting it in. For example, Kahuku is a good example. They said when the first wind farm came in, yeah, that's fine, we like wind farms. The second wind farm came in and said, we want to surround 3 sides of your community with towers, and by the way, we have a plan to put in a third wind farm, and another company said, hey, wait a minute, we want to put in wind farms just off your shore. So Kahuku would be surrounded by wind farms. Now, Surely when they accepted the first one, they didn't picture themselves as being an island in the middle of turbines. We have to do things creatively, and we have to make sure that we're all participating. So that's something that Lifeland is very concerned about. We're concerned about price, we're concerned about equity, we're concerned about respecting communities, and we're concerned about increasing democracy. Right now, renewables, wind and solar are dropping in price every year. A lot of people are putting money into storage. If you put 10 years into a cable and 5 years from now you can solve all of Oahu's problems with wind, solar, and batteries, then who picks up the price for the cable that's like the rail partially built and you're looking for funding?
So wind, solar, batteries, in your opinion, that would be the most cost-effective way to achieving the
On Oahu, yes.
Energy Initiative's goal.
On Oahu.
On Oahu.
And let me expand battery storage.
Battery storage, right?
So there are some storage without batteries, but yeah. Battery means chemical storage.
Wow, wow. So in terms of your operation, Life of Land, do you see it expanding? Are you going to be hiring? Are you going to be working, or is it more on your plate?
I would love to find more players. Lifeland encourages more players to get involved because the more different interests you bring to the table, the more different expertise you bring to the table, there's more likely the table will come up with the optimal solutions. And certainly if some utility accountants wanted to work with Lifeland, that would be awesome.
Great, great. Well, anything else you'd like to say or add?
I think that electrification of transportation is going to be a major thing that's going to come in the near future.
Can you explain that?
Right now, the utility is facing the fact that each year since 2008, their demand has gone down. So each year, people want less electricity, but they want the grid, they want the utility to spend more and more money upgrading the grid so they can attach distributed resources to it, like rooftop solar. So if the utility has to lay out more and more money for smaller and smaller amounts,
then it would be bringing in.
Right. So a solution would be for the utility to find another bucket to supply. And one of those buckets would be transportation. If half the cars in the state became electric cars, then you'd be powering them off the excess solar that's coming out in the middle part of the day.
So it's basically finding new markets to supply kilowatt hours to,
Yes.
so that you can keep your sales level or maybe even moving up.
Yes. 1/6 of the load on the Big Island, according to the utility, are 10 customers, the 10 largest customers, who have increasing ability to generate their own power and have at least contemplated leaving the grid.
Okay, well, this is all very interesting. Thanks very much for joining us today. And we're here today with Peter Rossig, Senior Spokesman for Hawaiian Electric Company. Peter, how you doing?
I'm great, thank you.
Good,
Thanks for having
good.
me here.
Great. Can you think into the future today?
Tomorrow, I can think into maybe next week.
Next week? How about 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road?
Well, that's a little harder, but we can talk about it.
Okay. So we have a utility that was started about, what, 120 years ago?
125.
125, and it began when King Kalakaua wanted to put some lights around Iolani Palace, and then later ideas came to electrify the city. Well, I think the utility has come a long way.
Absolutely has. We were, as you say, we started with basically just Honolulu. We have milestones where we stretched lines across the Ko'olaus to light the windward side. We incorporated what was then called Hilo Electric Light, now called Hawaii Electric Light on the Big Island. We incorporated Maui Electric, which includes Maui, Molokai, and Lanai. We now serve 95% of the people in Oahu, and we've done it for 125 years. And we're not quite sure what's going to happen, but we plan to be here for another 125.
Okay, well, that's a good idea. Originally, it was just a matter of making energy and selling it in terms of kilowatt hours. And now all of a sudden, was the rug pulled out from underneath you here, or was it kind of a willing idea?
Well, you know, change is inevitable, and this business, the utility business, didn't change that much for some 100 years or so, but certainly in the last 10 to 20 years, it's changed dramatically. And so now we live with the reality of change. Change is inevitable. We can control some of the factors that are changing, and many of the others we can't. We try very hard to look down the road, as you suggested. We've come up with a plan that we sent to the Public Utilities Commission that would take us to 2045. But you know, realistically, the most important part of that is the 5-year plan, which we talk about what we can do right now to build on for the future after that. Dwight Eisenhower, among others, I believe, said, you know, plans are useless. Planning is essential, and by which he meant, of course, you know,
Continuous planning.
Exactly. Once you write a plan, it's out of date.
It's obsolete already.
but the process of planning and looking at the environment you're in, looking at the horizon about what may or may not be coming into the future, what's going to change, that is an ongoing process of planning, and that is absolutely essential. And if you look back, say, 5 years ago, you would not have been able to predict where we are today. You wouldn't have been able to predict where we were on solar, for example. You would not have been able to predict how large wind turbines could be. You would not have been able to predict.
Not in terms of their size, but in terms of their demand and usefulness.
No, in terms of their size.
In terms of their size.
They're now, they've increased incrementally in size, not here in Hawaii, but in other parts of the world. They're getting to be incredibly large, and that increases their efficiency. You wouldn't have been able to predict what was possible to do with biofuels 5 years ago, and now we do have experimental jet planes that fly on biofuel. So when you talk about planning, you have to talk about it with the understanding that this particular technology, the utility business and the technologies that support it, are changing faster than any of us can really deal with. So we can look very realistically at 5 years, we can look optimistically at 15 to 20 years, but we understand that we will not be able, that anything we say about what's going to happen later is basically a goal and an aspiration. But what we can do in the next 5 years is something much more specific.
Well, let's look at realistically.
Sure.
What's going to happen 5 years down the road?
Well, right now we have put out a request for landowners in Hawaii who could host renewable facilities to come forward.
This
so
is
that we can,
statewide,
wherever we serve, every place but Kauai. We have asked the Public Utilities Commission to allow us to go out and look for new renewable energy projects for Maui and the Big Island and Molokai and Lanai. Probably those would be solar. And we have asked for permission, well, we've asked for what we call an expression of interest for companies which we believe are out there on Oahu that are ready to do wind farms. And
is there enough room? Is there enough land on Oahu? I mean, the
I think
military has a lot of land.
Yeah.
Whether you can use it or not, I don't
Yeah.
know.
Well, that's one of the reasons we went out and asked about the land availability. But we know there are at least some companies that are prepared to do wind farms, and we want them to express their interest to us so that we can go back to the commission and say, let's do it. And the reason we are moving quickly on that particular one is there is a federal tax credit.
Okay.
I mean, you can put solar anywhere, and you can you know, whatever space you have, that's how much you're going to get from that system. Wind is a little bit different, but there are some buildings here in Honolulu that have small wind turbines on them that generate power for that building. You can't put a turbine in an urban area because you can't build anything in the urban area that would be so large that if it fell, it would exceed your property line. So it basically has to be in the country. It has to be somewhere where there is what had been agricultural land, but you look at the Kahuku wind farm. It's on a hilly, the side of a hilly promontory in Kahuku, and there's plenty of places like that. It's not the land space. On an island like Oahu, it's the visibility factor that is
Yeah.
controlling.
Right.
People may or may not be happy to see a wind farm in their neighborhood, and that is more significant, I think, than the amount of space. People don't want wind farms near their homes. What's near, that depends on whether it's your house or
Wouldn't it be
somebody else's.
possible to shrink their size and put two blades on there?
Well, over the last 20 years, we've evolved wind turbines to the point that the most efficient kind are the kind you see. 20 years ago, there were those rotaries that went like this, and in a small area, those can generate a little electric power. But what we saw in wind is that there were 10 or 20 different designs 20, 25 years ago. And over time, they evolved to what you basically see, and the only variability is the size. So you can put a very large one out in the ocean someplace, you can put a smaller one on land, but the most efficient system seems to be the one looks like a big house fan that they forgot to put the cover on, and that is the technology that seems to be most effective. So the question is where you can put it, not just in the sense of the space, but how close it's going to be to people, how visible it's going to be to people. On Hawaii Island, there are two large wind farms, and you have to drive a long way to see them, so they don't bother anybody.
Right.
And on Maui, they've been very receptive. Maui, if when you fly into Maui, you look out the window of your plane, you see a row of what I consider to be beautiful wind turbines turning in the breeze. And folks on Maui seem to be, amenable to that. They may not be absolutely thrilled, but they say, oh, look, it's good for us. It's good for the environment. Other places, they say, oh, we don't want to look at that. So it's the NIMBY factor is much more a crucial factor, I think, especially on an island like Oahu, where you have a lot of people, very high density. There aren't very many places on Oahu where you can hide a wind farm. But, people in Kahuku, people in Haleiwa, Kuailoa wind farm, they've accepted wind farms there, and there are certainly other places on this island where there could be wind, and that's what we want to determine. So we've got a number of things that are moving forward aggressively. We've got a number of solar projects, which we hope to be able to announce very shortly. I hope before this airs that we'll be able to announce that we have about another 100 or 150 megawatts of solar for Oahu. So there's a lot of stuff happening. On the utility scale, we're continuing to see rooftop solar, and we are aggressively looking at reaching that 100% goal, not by 2045 when the state law requires it, but by 2040, because we believe with all those factors, with geothermal on the Big Island, with biofuel and biomass, we have the potential to get to our 100% goal at least by 2045, maybe earlier.
Okay, good. So let's optimistically talk about, say, 10 years down the road?
We expect to be at well over 40% renewable energy, perhaps close to 50. And we think Molokai will be 100% renewable. We think Lanai will be close to that. We are well on our way to being, we're already leading the nation in renewable energy, and we think we'll continue to have that lead for a long time into the future. We have the most aggressive renewable portfolio standard requirements in the nation, and we have the will of our companies and the will of the government and the people to get there.
So by that time, what would the utility have to look like?
Well, the utility would be different in the sense that, and I should also mention, we expect the amount of rooftop solar to increase trifold, 3 times as much as we have today. So we would go from, we're at about 80,000 rooftop systems today. So we're expecting to roughly triple that. So the utility will need to be able to handle all of those different kinds of generation inputs. Mm-hmm. And balance them as we do today. On a comparative basis, it's not like you're going to suddenly see a lot more equipment in your neighborhood. Quite the contrary, I think you're going to see less and less stuff in your neighborhood as more and more things get miniaturized, and more we use different kinds of information technology to communicate with them.
Okay, okay. And 20 years down the road?
We have an aggressive development plan, but we don't think we're going to incorporate much technology unless it's proven. We recently put online a new outage map. And now anybody can go to our website and they can see all the outages on the island. I hope they don't see too many, but it's all right there. Now, this is something our customers have been asking for a long time. You know, they're used to going online and seeing the weather and seeing what's going to be on television and all the rest. They said, why can't we see, instead of, you know, calling you up, or instead of waiting for your tweets, or instead of listening to the radio or watching TV, why can't we go online and see a map that shows us where all these things are? And now we have provided that, and we have provided a number of other tools online. And those are the kinds of things that are about our business and running our business and making that business viable for our customers.
Today we're interviewing Richard Walsgrove, Policy Director of the Blue Planet Foundation. We're going to be talking a little bit about what's happening 10 years down the road. What is Blue Planet looking at? What are you looking at? What do you see happening in the clean energy and renewable environment?
The issue is that the pace of change, at least if we look backwards 10 years, the pace of change has been so much faster than we all anticipated that it makes it really hard for us to think about what happens in 10 years. Our brains almost can't get around how different the world will be for 10 years from now.
Yeah, things change quickly.
But that doesn't mean there aren't core pieces of this puzzle that I think will be really, really critical, and that will be part of driving that pace of change. You know, one of the things that will change rapidly in the next 10 years, I think there are three to think about at the forefront of our energy minds. One is how we get around, transportation and mobility. I think that will change drastically. The second is energy storage. It used to be if an electron came from a power plant, we had to use it immediately. But energy storage will change that equation drastically. That will mean renewable energy becomes a lot cheaper, a lot easier to use. And then the third is, I think our relationship with energy will change. I think that the way that we think about how we use energy and when we use it and why we use it and where it comes from, the modern age is just giving us so much more information to work with. I think that relationship will change the same way my relationship has changed.
Is that relationship so that consumers have more control?
I would also use the phrase options. I think we'll all have more options about where our energy comes from. I can use a really, really simple example, and then we'll go through that process of the pace of change. My dishwasher has a timer on it, and I can choose the timer's for 4 hours. I can choose when I load the dishwasher and I close it, I can press that button and it won't come on for 4 hours. So if I do that at 8 in the morning when I leave for work, that means my dishwasher is running at noon. And at noon is when the sun is strongest, so I know that the solar panels on my house are generating electricity renewably, and I know that the hot water panel on my roof is also making hot water. And so it sort of just makes sense from a clean energy standpoint that I would use that 4-hour timer. Well, we're in the digital age. My iPhone, I could probably set a timer that was for 4 minutes, 4 hours,
Remote.
or 40 hours.
Yeah.
I think this whole system will just become more sophisticated, more automated. We'll have more choices. We'll have more control. I mean, the whole thing is going to change in ways that I think
That
we
means the
can't quite
consumer's going to have to understand how it all works. Right now, what consumers want is plug and play. Are consumers actually going to study what they can do, learn what they can do? I guess if it hits their pocketbook, they'll study.
This is all about the customer choice. Let's think about our cell phone plans. I know folks that are really cost conscious, and so they have cell phone plans where they know exactly how many megabytes of data they've used, and they don't want to go over a certain amount because then their data rate will drop. And then I know folks who don't know anything, they don't know what a megabyte is. So they're not going to spend that time, and they've paid for the unlimited plan, and they can use however much data they want. But customers have a choice. That's really different than the way the world worked when you had your long distance phone plan or your local phone plan, right? So I think these choices will be that'll be the face of our energy system. From a consumer standpoint, we're probably ready for, on the 10-year time frame, a shift so radical that we can't ever be perfectly ready for it. We know that electric vehicles, they're here. We just sold our 5,000th electric vehicle in the state. That curve is only going to get steeper and steeper as more electric vehicles become available.
And do you think that they'll get less expensive as more are produced and sold?
undoubtedly, we're seeing the battery costs drop already, and that's dropping the price of these vehicles. I spent some time on Craigslist recently just to get a sense of what is the market for used vehicles and what choices would you make. Well, a used electric vehicle, a Nissan Leaf, it's one of the most cost-effective choices you could make in terms of the upfront cost and then also the operating costs over time. So those prices are dropping. They have already dropped to where I believe the efficiency of the electric vehicle makes it the sensible choice from an economic standpoint. That will come down further and further. And then how do we charge them? Well, that's going to change as well. Today we charge them either by plugging them in at home or at work, or maybe you stop by a charging station at a grocery store. In the future, what if we're talking about wireless charging? So you charge as you drive down the road. This is technologically feasible. If that becomes the industry standard, it will change the way we get our energy for our cars. It's mind-boggling how much that could change 10 years from now.
Yeah, it could create a little chaos, people's jobs.
I think maybe we should embrace the chaos. The analogy I'd looked at there is the rooftop solar revolution we've seen in the state. In 2008, the state signed its landmark Clean Energy Agreement. And that Clean Energy Agreement had sort of the best estimates at the time of how the energy system would change 5 or 10 years from now, so the same time frame. And the best estimate was that we would have about 23 megawatts of solar panels on roofs in the state by 2015. Do you know what the number actually was by 2015? It was over 300 megawatts.
That's incredible.
We beat that estimate by something like a factor of 15. So that was slightly chaotic. That has driven a lot of change in our energy sector. It grew a whole local industry. There were a few years, I think something like a third of the construction expenditures in the state were on local solar installations. So that chaos, we can be afraid of chaos, or we can think, wow, that really drove our industry and built a whole new local
creates
industry.
new jobs, it creates new companies.
New opportunities.
New
opportunities in the sort of banking world, because now folks are finding that they can finance these sorts of systems.
Right.
So you've got bankers who got jobs, you've got construction folks who got jobs, you've got tech folks who got jobs. The utility is working to make this work. So maybe folks who in the past have worked in a traditional fossil fuel plant, they're gaining new skills and now they're working in this new field of grid management. The opportunities just abound. Technological choices here are almost mind-boggling in terms of what are the different ways we could store energy. What we need to concentrate on perhaps at this stage, at these very early stages of these technological shifts, are we creating a marketplace where this can happen? You mentioned earlier.
That's right, you've got to create the marketplace for it.
Store the energy to use later when it's cheaper. Well, in the past, we had energy rates that were flat all day long, so there was no incentive to do that. Well, now we're starting to pilot the idea of a time of use electricity rate where the cost of the energy changes over the course of the day, and that creates a market for energy storage.
10 years down the road, what are you going to be doing? What's Blue Planet going to be doing?
I look forward to beating all of our best estimates today by a factor of 15, 10 years from now. And so that's beating our estimates for how renewable our energy system will be, beating our estimates for how accessible and affordable and effective electric vehicles are, beating our best estimates for how much energy storage we're using on our grids. I think all those things are going to be far beyond what you and I think they are today. Until the day that Hawaii is completely renewable, and then we can start exporting those ideas to the rest of the world.
Good day, Governor David Ige.
What do you see happening 5, 10, 20 years down the road?
We do know that we have an abundance of natural resources that will allow us to generate almost unlimited energy.
If you were to compartmentalize 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, what do you see happening within those pockets of time to reach
So I do think that
100%?
the first, the next 5 and 10 years, there still is significant investments in energy generation, distributed generation. We continue to see the price of photovoltaics and other things drop to become economically competitive with wind and other hydroelectric, for example. We will continue to see different ways to look at storage. Storage is still the number one issue long term that needs to be addressed in order for us to make the 100% renewable. And so you'll see different kinds of storage opportunities being explored. We still need to make the investment in smart grid, in being able to have every user have a device on their property that so we can see what the energy demands of that consumer is and be able to look at what the total needs are and
Is that
what
still within the
total generation-
5-year, or is that goes
5
into
to
10
10
year?
years,
5 to
yeah,
10
right.
years.
It probably could be done quicker on the neighbor islands because the number of homes that would be involved are significantly fewer. It probably would be a longer-term investment here on Oahu.
15 years, 20 years?
The commission, I think, did a smart thing. They said really focus on the next 5 years because anything beyond that is really subject to so much change. If you had told me that we would get bids and project proposals back that was photovoltaic and battery storage, and it would price at below the cost of fossil fuel generated energy, I would have not believed it 5 years ago.
So it's sort of
So-
like focus on the present and the future will take care of itself?
Right, and then we need to be smart about which kinds of infrastructure investments really do make a long-term commitment that is beyond what that 5-year window might look like. And be able to identify those and be more thoughtful about those.
All right. Anything you'd like to say or add?
No, I mean, I'm excited about our energy future. I think that the entire community supports it. I think that we need to move forward and continue to move forward. And I'm excited that there are so many investors that are interested in supporting renewable energy projects. And the new innovations in battery storage and other kinds of storage devices just leads me to feel good about the effort being made and knowing that, especially if you're looking at 10 years, 15 years down the road, we will have options for storage that will reduce our cost and provide a cleaner energy future. I see our future a combination of all of those things, the things, our goals and aspirations for being a more sustainable community, being more self-reliant, growing more of the food that we eat, wanting to support local farmers, wanting and committed to 100% clean, renewable energy, all being working together synergistically to really move our community forward.
Sounds great, Governor. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.